Good morning, guys. Am I audible to all of you?
Yes,
Yes. My screen is also visible to all of you, right?
correct.
Correct. Someone asking me some question, right?
Uh, I just told you, like, can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah,
Just
yeah. I can hear you.
okay. So, like, my question was like, right now we are learning ADO.NET, and after that we are going to learn Entity Framework. But right now there is in market the Entity Framework course. So, like, why we are learning this technology, like ADO.NET and the Entity Core? Like, is it worth
See,
to learning?
basically, see, whether you learn ADO.NET Entity Framework or Entity Framework Core, right? There is no difference, right? If you guys are interested, then instead of teaching dot Entity Framework, I can start teaching Entity Framework Core. But why I'm not teaching Entity Framework Core? Because that is going to be covered in my .NET Core classes,
Oh, I see.
right? So in my .NET Core, which is going to start after this course, right? So in that course,
Mhm.
I'm going to talk everything about .NET Core. So I don't want to mix up that Entity Framework Core with this course because see, most of the see, I don't think that every project is going to be developed using Entity Framework Core. Most
I
of the
see.
projects are nowadays also developed using .NET framework, right? And if you compare the new project with the existing project, right, then new project means there are 5%, 3% project are there, which is based on .NET Core, right? But more than 95 projects are already developed or currently in a development process. They are using .NET framework, right? So if you got a chance to develop a new project, then it might be 50-50 chances that you might be developed using .NET Core or using .NET framework. But if already project is developed or some middle of the project development, right, then mostly they are using .NET framework, right? So that is the reason why I'm covering .NET Entity Framework here. And once we start the .NET Core, right, then at that time I will cover .NET Entity Framework Core.
Okay, got it. So like there is a no technology as we know like entity framework and entity flow both are different things. The same we do not have like ADO.NET and ADO.NET Core. There is not ADO.NET Core, right?
No, no, ADO.NET Core is there. That is what we are going to
Oh,
see.
okay.
See,
Okay.
name is different. So, but most of the concept are going to be same. The way we are having .NET Core MVC, right? We are
Mm-hmm.
having ASP.NET MVC, right? That is
Mm-hmm.
re-implemented with some advanced feature, with some existing feature, right? With the and they provided the name as .NET MVC. And similarly, we have ASP.NET Web API, right? They have provided .NET Web API, right? But whenever you are learning MVC or Web API, right, at that time, most of the feature what we are having with our ASP.NET MVC or Web API, right, those are available there, but with some additional feature which will make the framework more easier to us to use, and some of the concepts which are very difficult and confusing to understand in our existing system, right, they have removed those things and they have simplified something new, right? But the thing is that the base idea is going to be same, right? What is the purpose of an entity framework? It's a ORM tool which is going to generate the code behind for us, right? Code is going to be generated for us. We just need to give the information to the entity framework. This is my database, and this type of operation I want to do. So please include these tables, right? Whatever information I'm provided here, the same information, the same process, right? The same working principle is also applicable in entity framework core. That is also going to be one ORM tool. That is also going to interact with the database, right? There is also we need to give information to the entity framework core, right? But the process or how they are processing, right, how we are providing the information, that is going to be little bit different, and rest of the
Okay.
things are going to be same.
Okay. So we can consider like we can use like whatever we are learning in ADO.NET and entity framework, we can consider this is like a base, right? We can use this learning
See,
things as well.
right. So see, suppose you are developing one entity framework .NET Core application, then at that time you have to use entity framework core, right? But if
Mhm.
you are developing .NET framework application, then you have to use entity framework,
Okay.
right?
Yeah, okay.
So it's not possible that I can use entity framework core in my .NET application, or I can use entity framework in my .NET Core application, right?
Okay. So there is a similarity. There is not like both are not like completely different.
Exactly. There is
Okay.
similarity, they are not completely different. The main
Okay.
objective is going to be same, but the way we are implementing the things is going to be little
Mhm.
bit different.
Okay, got it. Thank you so much.
right? So, so if anyone attending the morning, I mean, if anyone having any experience into .NET Core, then they might be no. If no experience, then definitely I'm going to cover all these things, right? So, so what we have discussed yesterday, we have discussed two things, right? Recording is started. Yes. So yesterday we have discussed two things. One is SQL connection and one is SQL command. So basically SQL connection means we need to provide the connection string detail, right? Connection string basically what it comprises of some key value pair, right? What are the key value pair where the data source is? What is the database name? Which kind of authentication you require. Data source means you have to provide the machine name where your database is located or the IP address of your machine, right? That is what you need to provide. Database means on which database you want to communicate. Integrated security I'm using means I'm using Windows authentication. If you want to use SQL authentication, then you have to provide the user ID and a password. And then we need to pass this connection string to this SQL connection constructor. So here the connection object is created, right? Here the SQL connection means here the connection object is created, but not the connection is open, right? Connection object is creating and communicating or opening the connection, both are two different things, right? So when we call the open method on this connection object, right? At that time only it is making establishing the communication link. It is opening the connection. Now your application is connected with the database. Now you can execute the query, right? If this connection is not opening, right? If you are commenting this section, right? Even though you created the connection object, right? Your application is not connected with the database. If your application is not connected with the database, and when you execute the select query or whatever SQL statement, then where it is going to execute the I mean, where it is going to execute, right? Because the connection is not established. So a network related instance specific error you will get, right? Now, if I run the application, then you will see that an open connection is required while I'm executing this thing, right? So what error? Requires an open and available connection. Why it require an open and available connection? Because this is at work on the connection oriented architecture, right? So connection is not established, then I cannot execute this thing, right? Now if you open these things, right? Now if you open the connection, then you will understand this thing, right? So you are getting the data as expected, right? And then what is the use of a command, SQL command, right? So once you open the connection, then you need to execute some command. And if you want to execute the command, then you have to use SQL command class. And using this SQL command class, right, we need to specify what is the SQL statement that you need to execute using the command text properties. You need to specify the connection. It might be possible that you are having multiple databases, right? I will show you one example, right? When I will discuss distributed transaction, right? Where you might be communicating with different databases, right? So if you are having multiple databases, right? One connection string pointing to student DB, another connection string pointing to employee DB, right? Then you want to execute this, you want to execute, and let's assume that both the connections are open, right? Both the connections are open. Then how the .NET framework will able to know that I need to execute this? This SQL statement on connection string. I mean, in database one or database two, on I mean on student DB or employee DB. For that, you need to specify the connection object here, right? So what it means now, when we execute any of the method, right, executing method on this command object like execute reader, execute non-query, execute scalar, right? Then at that time, the respective command, right, the respective SQL statement is going to be execute on this connection, right? On this connection only if that is open. If the connection is not open, right, then it cannot execute this select statement on this database. Clear?
Yes.
right? And then we have discussed this execute reader method is one of the method. Apart from that method, we are having two more methods. One is execute non-query. Whenever we want to execute any insert, update, delete statement, and if you want to know how many records are updated by that statement, right? Then in that case, you have to use execute non-query. One another method is that suppose you want to return a single value, right, from your SQL statement, like the count of employees, right, max salary, mean salary, average salary, like this. If you are returning a single value, then you have to use execute scalar. Whenever you are returning multiple data, or you can say records, right, then in that case you have to use execute reader, and the execute reader is going to return SQL data reader object, right? And this SQL data reader, right, it is a forward only read access object, right? Means what? Now, by using this SQL data reader, you can access, right, so all the elements that are written by this SQL statement, right? This SQL statement, suppose returning 5 elements, right? Then those 5 elements you can access via this str. So this str having one method called read method, and this read method will return true as long as there are elements, right? Suppose in this case, if 5 elements are there, then str.read method going to return true 5 times, and you can access by using the string indexer, or even you can also access by using the integer indexer. Right now, if you remember, what is the, okay, let me give this as a 1, this give as a 2, this give as a 3, and let me put another also, right, 0. Right now, let me run the application. Right, so in this case you can see id is at 0th location, name is at location 1. Then I'm having two same value. Why is there any issue? 0 1 2, yeah, we have to write 3, right? So because indexes in .NET framework are 0 based, so you can see now it is properly saying. First, it is printing the 3 values because we are only accessing name, email, and mobile. And the second statement, I'm accessing the ID, name, email, and the mobile, right? Why like this? Because if you go to the database, right, and if you expand the student table, then you will see that this table having 5 column, 4 column. First column ID, second column name, third column email, and the last column is mobile. And that is what it is accessing: ID, name, email, and the mobile. So today we are going to keep discuss on this SQL data reader object, right? So what is this SQL data reader? Why I'm going to discuss this, as we have to discuss each of the collection class, each of the ADO.NET classes in detail. We have already discussed two things. One is SQL connection, and another is SQL command. So today we are going to discuss SQL data reader. And why I'm discussing SQL data reader? Because I'm communicating with the SQL Server database. If you are communicating with the Oracle database, then you have to use Oracle data reader. If you are using communicating with other databases like MySQL, MS Access, then you have to use OLEDB data reader, right? So let us discuss what is this ADO.NET SQL data reader class is all about. This class is used to read the data from the SQL Server database in the most efficient manner, right? So in this case, you can see I'm reading the data from the database, right? And this is only possible because of the SQL data reader. So when I execute this statement, right, this method is going to return one SQL data reader object, right? And using that SQL data reader object, I can only read the data from the SQL Server database. So when this statement is executed on the database, right, so don't think that once I execute this statement, right, I can access the data directly, right? If you want to access the data, you have to use this SQL data reader. Why it is how it is exactly happening now? Once this statement is executed, 5 records are there in the database side. I want to fetch the records one by one, right? Then you have to use this one. right? So basically using data reader object, I can access the data from the database, right? For example, if I'm executing this select statement, right? Right. So in this case, this select statement is executed. This data is on the database side, right? I want to fetch these records one by one. And for that purpose only, I'm using this one, right? And then when I'm calling the read method, this read method will check, is there any data in the data reader, right? Yes, one record is there. Okay. 5 records is there. Okay, let me read the first record. Once it read the first record, then it will go to the next record. Once it read the next record, then it will go to the next record. But guys, remember, it's a forward only. Forward only means it can only goes in the forward direction. If once you read the record number 3, if you try to read the record number 2, this is not possible, right? So this is what I have mentioned here, right? It is the most efficient way to read the data from the database. It reads the data in forward only direction. It means once it read a record, it will then read the next record. There is no way go back and read the previous record. See, once this record is written, it will go to the next record, but not possible to go back to the previous record. Clear? Guys?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
And the second important point is SQL data reader is connection oriented. Connection oriented means what? Now, this connection should be open, right? For example, if I open this connection after reading the first object, right? I just close this method. I just call the close method, right? So once the connection is closed, then it cannot communicate with the database and it cannot read these records because it is reading the data from the SQL Server database only, right? Now, in this case, you will see after reading the first record, it is going to throw one error, right? And the error is invalid attempt to call the read when reader is closed, right? So see, first record is read, right? So this statement, these two statement is executed. Then I close the connection. Once the connection is closed, then the reader cannot read the data because the reader is closed, right? So what it means? It means, right, it required an open connection, right? As soon as the connection is open, it is going to read the data, and once the connection is closed, right, then it cannot read the data. So it is connection oriented, right? So it means it require an open and active connection to the data source while reading the data. The data is available as long as the connection with the database is exist, right? So SQL data reader is read only. What it means? It means I can only access the data, right? So in this case, try to update the data, right? So try to update the data. What it's saying? You cannot update the data. See, this is only read-only access, right? So what is saying? It represents cannot be assigned. What is saying? Cannot be assigned to. Why? It is. Is it visible to you all or not? It is read only, right? So this property, right, what I'm using to store the data, right? This accessor is read only accessor means what? You can only read the data. You cannot write the data. Clear?
Yes.
Yeah.
So basically 3 things you need to remember. It is used to read the data from the database. It is forward only direction, means it can read in one way, right? It is connection oriented, means one active and open connection is required. And this is read only, means you cannot update or change the data using data reader. Clear? Second.
Yes.
Right. Second thing, how to create an instance of a reader. You already see. So if I try to do something like this, right? If I try to do something like this, suppose I'm going to create an instance, let's say like this. Is that allowing me? Am I able to create an instance using the SQL data reader?
No.
No. Now let's go to the definition of this class, right? What is this? Is a class, no issue, right? But does this class having any constructor?
No.
No. If this class is not having any constructor, what it means?
It has default constructor.
It has a default constructor. And what they have made that constructor as private, right? By default, see, in this case, it has not a default constructor. They are having the private constructor, right? Which you cannot see here, right? This is the reason why they are not allowing us to create the instance, right? But what they have provided another mechanism to create an instance. And what is, now they are providing one method called execute reader. And when you call this execute reader method, it is going to return one SQL data reader object. Clear? So you cannot create an instance by using the new keyword, right? Because there is no constructor public constructor available which can create an instance of this class. But they have provided another option, and that option is that whenever you call the execute reader method on the command object, that execute reader method is going to return an instance of SQL data reader. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Right? So this is the thing. So you cannot create the instance of SQL data reader using the new keyword. Then the question is how we get or create the instance of SQL data reader class. In order to create an instance of SQL data reader class, what we need to do, we need to call the execute reader method on the command object which will return an instance of SQL data reader class. So this is my command object, right? And I'm calling this execute reader method. This execute reader method will going to return an SQL data reader instance, right? Let us try to understand this one with example, right? We have already created this database in our previous session, student DB, and we have already added few elements, right? If you have not created or deleted the data, then you can simply create the database, use the database, right? To create the student table and insert the data, right? Let me do these things once more, right? Let me delete this student DB. And while deleting, please make sure close existing connection. If anything is running, that will be closed and it will safely delete the database, right? Now, let me go and execute this statement directly. So you can execute one by one, right? But I can also, you can also directly execute all these things at once, right? I have executed this. The database is created. Now refresh the things, and here you can see the table, right? The table is going to be student, right? So you can verify the data, the student is there, right? So our database part is done, right? Now let us try to understand this execute reader method. We have already the same code. Yeah,
Yeah. Uh, can you please reset the previous code?
sorry.
Can you please reset the previous code?
Yes.
Oh yeah. Okay. So on line number 31, you have mentioned that str and in the square bracket name. So like it is just for the heading, right?
It is not the heading, it is the column name.
Okay. So column name, whatever we are mentioning into SQL.
Yes, in database, what is the column name? So this is ID, name, email, and the mobile. This is exactly same as the column name. Again, I'm going to explain this thing. And the second thing is you can access this by using the column name, right? Even you can access by using index position.
Okay, so here you have written two things. So like, is it compulsory to return two things, like a column name or like a index number 0, 1, 2, 3, or like we can write only line number 31 or 32 as well?
See, so is there any link between these two statements?
I don't think so.
So that is, you don't think so means you are absolutely right, right? You can access the element from this data reader using the string index name or
Okay.
integer index position. Both approaches there, right? Whichever
Okay.
approach you like, you can use. That is the reason why I'm showing both the approaches.
Okay, and in string index also we can like write name in like a capital or the small letter, right?
Yeah,
No
that
case
is fine,
sensitive.
right?
Okay.
So here I can write email, right? Here I can write email, right? So let me run this application. You are getting the data.
Yes, but why we are getting uh, data only? Okay, okay, we are getting 2 times data. Okay, got it.
Yeah, because we have written two console
Two things,
statements.
yeah.
So whatever we have discussed, the same thing it is, right? So here now I'm not using that select star from student, right? Now what I'm using, name, email, mobile number from student, right? Later, I will show you how to execute this instead of writing this select query, right? Raw SQL. I can make use of a student procedure. That is what we are going to discuss later. But now we are just going with the TSQL statement, right? So creating the connection object, creating the command object, opening the command object, opening the connection, right? Calling the execute reader method. The execute reader method returning me one SQL data reader object. Using that data reader object, I can read the data from the SQL Server database. And this data reader required an open connection. And this data reader is going to be read only, going to be forward only, right? So if connection is not open or if the connection is closed, then you cannot access the data using data reader, right? And using data reader, you can access by using string name, right? Or by using index position, right? So instead of using string name, you can also access the data by using integer index position, right? So now 0 is not pointing to ID column. Previously 0 is pointing to ID column, but now 0 is pointing to name, because here I'm not selecting the ID, right? The way the sequence of selecting the column is exactly the sequence of indexing, right? Name in the first position means index is going to be 0. Email is second position means index is going to be 1. And mobile is third position means index is going to be 2, right? So this is what we have already discussed. Now run the application and see the output. Right, you are getting the output as expected, right? So you have two options how you can access, and as we discussed, using this integer index or whatever, right? You cannot set or get the values, right? This is not possible, right? So accessing records using integer index position, that is we have already shown you. So we have two options. You can access the data by using string index position or using integer index position, right? Another thing I have already shown you, active and open connection is always required, right? If the connection is closed, right, then you cannot access the element. Is there any question from anyone related to SQL data reader object?
Sir,
Yes.
I have a doubt, sir.
Yes.
Sir, why we are using while loop, sir?
Right. So what is our requirement? I want whatever data I'm returning from the database, I want to display in the UI, right? Display means what? It is a collection of record, right? It's a collection of a record means it is more than one record. If you want to access a collection, right? If you want to iterate through, if you want to display all the elements of a collection, then how you can display it? Without using loop, can you do this?
Yeah, can we use for loop, sir?
See, for loop you can use, but how you can identify? So while going for loop, right? What are the three things is required? Index position, the number of elements, right? You should know in advance. Do you know? Do you have any idea how many elements are there in the, or how many records are there in the student table?
No, sir.
Then how you can use for loop?
Like for each.
But in this case, I'm not iterating. For each is a different one, right? For each means in that case, you should have a collection.
Okay,
Right?
okay, sir. Yeah.
So in this case, I do not have any collection, right? In this case, the data is not is in our in .NET application, right? So we are just going to read the data from where? So in this case,
SDR object from the SDR.
so in this case, we are the, so whenever this statement is execute, it will check the check this table, right? Is there
Yeah.
any element, right? And whenever I'm writing this statement, na, so it is only going to the database and fetching the data, right? And
Yes, sir.
at this moment, the data is not with us, right? For that purpose, we are having data set, right? Data set is going to be working on disconnected architecture, right? But this data reader, it is connection oriented, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So for that, this SQL data reader read means it will read one record and you are just accessing that record. Clear?
Yeah, clear, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. So this is SQL data reader, and the use of a SQL data reader is just to, I mean, whenever you call the execute reader method, whatever the data is written by not data, and in that case, it is going to return one SQL data reader object, and using the SQL data reader object, you can access the data from the database. The read method, what I'm using there, that method is going to return true as long as there is data, right? So if you go to the definition of this read method, right, then you will see what is the return type Boolean. So what exactly it is going to do true if there are more rows, otherwise false, right? Advance the SQL data reader to the next record, right? So basically what happens now, if there is record, then it will return true and it will advance to the next record so that I can access the next record, right? So this is all about your SQL data reader, and this is work on connection oriented architecture. Now let us try to understand what is this SQL data adapter, right? So basically you guys might know there are two important things, right, while working with the database. One is data set. Have you guys learned or heard that term data set?
No.
No. So there are basically, you can consider, okay, let me give you one idea. So you know what is database? So in our example, right, in our example, student is DB is the database, right? In our example, what we have discussed, student DB is the database. Inside the student DB, we have created the student table, right? So this is nothing but my database, and this is nothing but my table. Clear?
Yeah.
Right. So in this case, data set, and inside this data set, we are having data table. So this data set you can consider as a database, and this data table you can consider as a table, right? So these things, right, in our database, if I want to store some data, then I need to store the data inside a table, but that table should be reside inside some database, right? Without a database, you cannot create a table, right? And once you create the database, then you can create the table, and within the table, you can store the data. And all these things are happening where? At the database server end. Clear?
Yes.
Right? Right. Now, I want to do the same thing in my .NET application end, right? In the .NET application end, I want to create, so in this case, you are having student table. You might be have some other table also, na? You can have employee table, right? You can have product table. Yes or no? So once you create a database in the SQL Server database, once you create the database in some server, it might be SQL Server, MySQL Server, Oracle, no matter. Once you have the database, you can create any number of tables. And each table is going to store the specific data. Student table means student specific data. Employee table means employee specific data. Product table means product specific data. Clear?
Yes.
Now what I want is, I want to do the same thing in my .NET application. Right? So I want to do something in my .NET application means you can use data set and data table. But here, this DB is mandatory and this table are then going to be created. But here, this data set is not mandatory, but this data table is going to be mandatory, right? What it means, independently, I can create one student data table, right? Student data table. I can create, right? I can create one employee data table, right? I can create one product data table. Someone is typing something. Guys, who is on?
No.
Pratik,
Yes, sir.
are you typing something?
No, sir. I am on mobile today.
Okay. Okay, so basically I'm having three different student. One is student data table, employee data table, and product data table. Now, what I need to do now, whatever data inside the student data table, I want to fill in the student table. I want to fill the student data table. Is this possible? Yes, possible. Whatever data in employee table, I want to fill this employee data table. Whatever data in product data table, I want to fill this product data table, right? And this is possible by using the concept called data adapter. Data adapter, right? So basically what exactly happening, the data adapter provide one mechanism, right? And by using that mechanism, we can fill the database table data with this data table, right? Whatever data you are having in student table, I can fill all those data inside my student data table, right? And once you fill the data, right, then it is not required a connection to access the data from the data table. Right. So what is the job of a SQL data reader adapter? Now it is simply fetch the data from this student table and it is simply fill the student data table. What is the job of data adapter? Now you just need it just fetch the data from this employee table and fill this employee data table. Right. That means it is just like a bridge, right? So in between your database and the data table. So right. And once it fill the data table, then you can do whatever you want. And once you are accessing the data from this data table, an open connection is not required because the data already filled with this data table, and this data table is a .NET object, or you can say it's a collection. Right here, you can do whatever you want. You can read the data forward direction, backward direction. You can update the data, right? You can access the data without having any kind of what you can say activate the open connection, right? This is data table. Then, sir, what is data set? Now, the data set, right? Data set is nothing but it's a database you can consider, but it is a collection of data tables. It is a collection of data tables. Data table can work independently, right? Data table can work independently. You can fill this student data with this data table, student data table, even though this adapter can fill the student data inside a data set. But when it is filling the student data inside a database, then at that time, what exactly happening behind the scene? Now, within this data set, it will create a data table, and within that data table, it is going to fill the student data. Right? So independently, you can fill the data using data table. It is also possible that you can fill this data inside a data set. But when you are filling the data inside the data set, behind the scene, the data is going to be stored inside the data table. How to store the data, how you can access the data, how the data is going to be stored inside a data table, inside a data set. Practically, we will see all these things. But pictorially, this is the thing, right? You are having database, you are having table, here you are having data set, and here you are having data table. Independently, you can fill the data table or you can fill the data set. And when you are filling the data set, behind the scene, data table is only going to hold the data. So now can anybody tell me, now can I say this data adapter as a bridge between your database server and a data set and a data table?
Yes.
So
Can we say
basically
that?
this data adapter is going to be act as a bridge between your database and the data set and the data table, and whose primary role is to fill the data set and data table with the data from the database table. Clear?
Sir,
Yeah.
question, can we say that it's like a in-memory database?
Exactly. So in this case, so whatever I'm saying, this data table and the data set, right? They are going to hold the data, right? And as I'm saying, and once they are holding the data, whatever operation you can do, right? You do not need any active or open memory. Why? Because the data is already stored here. So it's an in-memory object. Yeah, absolutely right, because they are holding the data in memory, right? So whenever, and in the case of a SQL data reader, in that case, SQL data reader not holding the data. Every time you need data, he is going to the database. Why? Because he is not holding the data. But in this case, you do not need to go to the database to fetch the data, right? Once you fill this data table, the data table is holding the data itself, right? And this is the reason why active and open connection is not required. This is the reason why you can change the data. This is the reason why you can go with forward direction, backward direction, everything is fine. So it's a in-memory object. Absolutely right. Clear?
So yeah, so as you said, like it's a in-memory object. So for an example, our database has like 50 tables, and each table has 10 legs of rows, right? So like when we are when we are using the data adapter, so it's going to like retrieve all this table from the database and storing into memory, or we can return only one table.
See, so that see, using this data adapter, you have to specify some SQL command, right? SQL query, right? Suppose you are fetching 3 columns from 2 tables, right? So basically it's a SQL select query, and the select query returning how much data, how many number of data, that is what it depends, right? Your database having 10 tables doesn't mean 10 table is going to be built. So it's going to be depend on the select query what you are using with this data adapter, right? It's possible that you can write a storage procedure which is going to return, right, two select statement. Then in that case, the first select statement will be stored inside the first data table. The second select statement is going to store inside the second data table, right? If you are writing a single select statement, then whatever the data and whatever the record is going to be returned, right, that is only going to be filled with one data table.
Okay, so for an example, if we like a writing query like that, select everything from student table and select everything from employee table. So like we are calling like working on 2 tables. So like a 2 table we will retrieve, and like a data set is a collection of data tables. So in data set there will be 2 table, because we type
Exactly,
2 times select everything from 2
exactly.
tables. Okay.
Exactly. In that case, you need to use data set. And as I mentioned, it is a collection of a data table. So one of the select query data is going to stored in one table, and another select query data is going to be stored in second table, right? So don't worry, guys. These things we are going to cover, right? Whatever you are asking. Once you start discussing the storage procedure, right? At that time, I will explain this thing, right? Once you're discussing this data set concept, right? Working with storage procedure, everything I'm going to cover. Don't worry. But for now, just try to understand what is data set and what is data table. Clear?
Yes, sorry to interrupt, but a last question. So for an example, when we are writing, when we are using like a left join query, at that time, at the end of
See,
query, we are only retrieving one table.
in this case, it is not a matter. So in this case, it's a student table, right? From the
Okay.
student table, it is going to return the data. And whenever I'm saying data table and or data set, at that time, right, it doesn't matter what table from where you are fetching the data, right? At the end, the data is going to be stored inside this data table. It might be possible that you are doing some inner join, left join, you are fetching data from multiple table, right? Then in that case, what is the column name you have specified? Based on that column name only, it is going to create the data table.
Okay, but what I'm telling is like when we are using such type of queries, instead of like a 2 select statement, if we are using left join or inner join something, so at the end of that SQL query, we will have only one table. So in that case, in data set, only one table there will be, right?
Exactly. So you are having a single select query. Doesn't matter whether you are using join or not. You are using multiple fetching the data from a single table or multiple table, doesn't matter. So what is matter? How many columns are there in the select query? Based on the column, it will create the data table and store the data. Clear? And
Yes,
same
yeah,
for
I clear, but I guess like my question is different. So I said like for an example, there is a SQL query. In SQL query, we are writing like select everything from student and select everything from employee. Means there are like 2 different queries. But when we are running those queries, then at the end of like those 2 queries, we will.
if you are having 2 select query, then you have to use data set, and in that data set, the first select query data is going to store in data table 1, and the which index position is going to 0, and the second select query data is going to be stored in data table 2, which index position is going to be 1.
Yes, but when we are using left join, that at that time when we are using left join, we are
If
working
you
on
are,
two
if
tables,
you
student
are,
and
so I'm not talking about how many join or what kind of a use. So I'm talking about the number of a select statement, right? So one select statement means one data type,
yes,
right? If you are
yes.
using join, right? Join means also there is only having one select statement, right? If you are doing any
Yes,
kind
yes,
of a
yes,
join, then there is a one select statement. Na? In that
yes,
select
yes,
statement, internally, you are performing the joining operation. Then one select statement means one table, and
one
that
table.
table, right? And that select statement might be few, right? Few columns from table 1 and a few columns from table 2. It might be possible like this, right?
Yeah, but only one select, so only one table. Yes.
One select. In that case, it will create the data table based on the columns of what is there in the select query. So whatever column you specified in the select query, based on that column, it will create the data table and store the data table with the required data, what is written by your select query. And once it got the data, then whatever operation you want, you can do in memory, right? Because at
Yes.
that time, it already fetched the data from the database, right? No need to go to the database again and again. So it's in memory, right? Whatever operation you want, you can perform.
Yes, yes, got it. Thank you.
So sir, can we say that the result of the two can be considered as a view in SQL?
Sorry?
The result of the select can be considered as a view in SQL.
FDU, sorry, exactly, I'm not getting your question.
So we are saying that, for example, they're selecting the table 1 and table 2, and the result would be considered a read-only table, which is considered as a view in SQL Server, in SQL.
See, at the end, what I'm saying now, whether you are selecting or whether you are, see, in this case, not only I'm using this select statement, right? So I can also create a storage procedure. I can also use storage function, right? I can use views, right? Anything you want, you can do. At the end, how many, what are the data is returning, right? It is returning the data using, I mean, if you are using one storage procedure, right? If that storage procedure having 3 select statement, then 3 table is going to be returned.
Okay.
Right? If your I mean, if your storage procedure, right, user defined storage procedure or user defined function, whatever you are returning using, right? So that basically depend on how many table data it is going to return. How many table data in the sense, don't think that if I am using a join having 3 table, then it is not considered it as a 3 tables. It will considered as a single table which containing the data from 3 different tables, right? And in that way, it's going to be written the data according, right? So still, see, why I'm saying this thing not to be worried about, because whatever you are asking, right, everything I'm going to cover with practical, right? I know sometimes it's difficult to understand the concept using theories, but once you understand this thing practically using examples, right, then your question will, or your doubt is going to be clear, right? So it's just a
So
explanation, right?
basically, it is a union of things.
See,
Whatever you are fetching.
if you are performing the union operation, then at the end, it is going to return a single data set or a multiple data set.
Single.
Single data set means
Yes.
it's going to be stored inside a single data type.
Yeah.
Right. So for example, in this case, right, in this case, whatever I'm doing, okay. Select star from student, right? I'm using select star from student where ID is greater than 102. So now I'm executing these two statements. How many data sets I'm returning? I'm fetching. How many results are there? One result window is for this select statement, another result window for this select statement, right? Right now, what I'm doing, I'm saying so this is my result set 1 and this is my result set 2. Right? Now you want to perform the union operation, right? Exactly, I forgot the union syntax. Right? So this union operation I have performed. So in this case, how many results that I am getting?
Like one
Or
table.
four results, and
So
it's a union.
in this case, don't consider that one table, right? In this case, consider that I'm using two different tables, but I'm having a single result set. Single result set means only one data table is going to be created for this one.
After the union operation, only one
After
table
one,
is.
right? Suppose you are performing the joining operation, then also only one result set means one table is going to be created.
Yeah, correct.
Right?
Now I
So
got it. Yeah.
now your question, now doubt is clear?
Yes.
Right? So don't consider that number of tables. Consider that the number of a result sets, or right? In this case, one result set, so one table, right? But in this case, instead of union, right? If I'm writing this two select statement, right? Then I am having two result set, and now it is going to create two different tables. One data table storing this data, and another data table is going to store this data.
Oh, okay.
It's all about final output.
Exactly, final result set.
Got it.
Still
You could
anybody?
Sorry? You could even select different number of columns. Like in the second one, you would
Yeah,
say
exactly. No issue.
ID and name, and it would be completely different.
ID name, I can select here and I can select all column here, right? So in this case, one data table will be created with this 2 column and another data table will be created with this 4 columns. No matter, because they are independent, right? There is no link between this select statement and this select statement. They are independent select statement. The data table is going to be created independently. One data table for this select statement and another data table for this select statement. Clear?
Yes.
Oh.
Okay. Right. So now the question is, we understand we are having database, we are having database table, and we can store the data inside my data set. Even though if I'm storing inside the data set, behind the scene data tables are going to store the data, or even I can directly store the data inside my data table. The question is how? And the answer is using DataAdapter, right? See, what is SQL.NET, ADO.NET SQL Data Adapter? The ADO.NET SQL Data Adapter works as a bridge between a data set and a data source, right? Data set or data table, you can say that, not data set, you can also say data table and a data source. Data source means in this case, you are using SQL Data Adapter means you are interacting with the SQL database. If you are using Oracle Data Adapter means at that time, the data source is going to be Oracle data set, Oracle database, right? The SQL Data Adapter is a class that represents a set of SQL command and a database connection. It can be used to, it is used, it not can be, it is used to fill the data set and the data table data set or data table and update the data source, right? So not dropped it. Let me remove this. So once you paste the data within the data set and the data table, then whatever operation you want, you can perform, right? So basically, it's work as a bridge between your data set or data table and a data source. Data source means your database, right? And in this case, the database is going to be SQL Server, right? And this SQL Data Adapter class represents some SQL command. Means what? Now, what is the command means what? By using that command only, you will fetch the data from the database, right? And it also contains a connection object, right? Connection means on which database, on which server, right? On which table you want to execute that table information, right? From which database this table belongs to, from which server this database belongs to, right? that information you will get by using the connection object. So this data adapter object, right, class actually expected two things. One is SQL command and another one is database connection. And this database command, right, SQL command is going to execute on this database connection, and whatever the data is written, whatever the records are written, right, those are going to be filled within this data set and the data table. All right. So how to create an instance of SQL data adapter? You can see it is very much similar to the SQL command, right? So it is very much similar to the SQL command. And here in SQL command, first of all, you should have the connection string. You can create an instance of a connection object, right? Then what you are doing now, in that case, I'm creating the SQL command cmd equals to this, right? So instead of doing this, so what I can do, I can create a SQL data adapter, SQL data adapter, and I'm providing this name as adapter, ATP adapter, right? So now you can see SQL data adapter, and at least two things you need to provide. One is the command, right, or the select or the SQL statement, and this select statement is going to be executed on which connection, that connection string information or that connection object you need to provide, right? And once these things is given to this adapter object, right, then what will happen, right? Let us see this thing practically, right? And how to fill the data, everything we are going to discuss, right? So you understand how to create an instance of a SQL data adapter,
Yes.
right? So basically you need to provide two information. One information is the SQL statement that you want to execute, and the other one is the connection object. It is similar to the SQL command, right? But in SQL command, we are going to call this execute reader method, which is going to return this str, and we are just doing all these things. But this thing is not going to be happen here, right? See, I'm going to use the same example, right? Same example, okay? Right. So in this case, we are going to make use of one method called okay, let me resolve the namespace first. Right. So data table is available inside the system.data namespace, right? So data adapter, right? See, so let me remove these things, right? Okay. So I'm creating a data table. I'm not providing the structure of this data table, right? I'm just creating a data table. And then if you see, I'm calling this fill method, and this fill method on which object? Adapter object. And I'm passing this data table to this fill method. So what will happen here, right? This fill method of data adapter object is going to do lot of work behind the scene. Right, so this data adapter fill method is going to open the connection, right? You do not need to call the open connection method, right? So this fill method internally going to open the connection. This fill method internally going to execute this command. This fill method is going to retrieve the data by executing this command. This fill method once retrieve the data from this query, it is going to store those data inside this data table. And once it fill the data table with the data written by the select query, it is going to close the connection. Guys, remember what are the things it is going to do? First, tell me. Open the connection. Right. Second, execute the command. Right. Third thing, retrieve the what?
Result.
Retrieve the result. Come on, fourth thing.
Close the connection.
No, fill the data table. Fill or store the data. Fill or store the retrieved result. Store the fill the retrieved result in the data table. Come on, guys. Fifth one is close the
Close the connection.
connection, right? These are the things is going to be handled by the filter, right? And here, you know how to open the connection. So connection.open, execute the command. He is internally executing this command, right? Retrieve the result. Once the data, once the select query is execute, right? Whatever the return, let me copy these things, right? Let me paste it here, right? This data is retrieved, and this data having how many columns? Name,
3.
email, and mobile, right? Based on the database schema, right? So it is going to create, fill the data table, and while filling the data table, internally it is going to name column, email column, mobile column, right? And whole structure, right? Not only the data along with the column heading, right? Everything is going to store inside the data table, right? Which data table? In this case, this data table. How to create a data table? This is the simple syntax. Data table dt equals to new data table, right? Then what is data table? It is a collection of a record, right? So if you go to the definition of data table, it is represents one table of in-memory data, right? So the way you are storing the table data in SQL Server database, right? It is also going to store the data in memory, right? Table data means what? Now it is going to store the data in the form of a rows and columns, because table is one which is going to store the data in row and column format, right? So in this case, it is also going to store the data in a tabular format, right? Understand, guys?
Yes.
Right? So once you got the data, the connection is closed, right? Why the connection is closed? Because this is going to work in disconnected environment, right? Connection is not required, right? Now you can see I'm fetching the data, and for fetching the data from the data table, you do not need an active and open connection, right? Active and
Yes.
open connection is not required. So in previous case, when we are discussing SqlDataAdapter, right? And while using the while loop, right? At that time, while fetching the data, connection is important. Connection should be active and open. Otherwise, we are getting that error. But now connection is not required. And in this case, you can access directly using the for each loop. Why? Now this data table is going to store a collection of rows, right? And how you can access the collection of rows? See, data table means collection of rows. Yes or no? This is the first row, this is the second row, this is the third row, and this is the fourth row, right? And this is nothing but your header. The heading name is name, email, and mobile, or you can say column name is name, email, and mobile. So 3 column and 4 rows, right? So now I want to display all the data. Display all the data means I want to display these 4 rows. Yes or no? So if you want to display all the rows, right, then this data table having one property called the rows, right? You have to call this rows property. Now, if you go to the rows definition, then you will see that gets the collection of rows that belongs to this table, right? So gets the collection of rows that belongs to this table, right? So what it means, that it means how many rows are there inside this data table that is going to return by this property. So how many rows inside this data table now? How many
4.
rows?
4 rows.
4.
Right? That means those 4 rows of data it is going to return, and you can store that data using a data type of what type of a data type?
Data row.
Data row, right? So you can see I'm returning this data row. So a data row collection that contains data row objects, right? Otherwise, a null value if no data row exists, right? If no data row exists, if the collection is empty, it is going to return null. But if data row is existent, it is going to return me some data row object, right? If it is returning me one data row object, right, then I can store that value inside a data row, right? So data row means what? Now, if you go to the definition, then it is saying that represents a row of data in a data table, right? So represents a row of data in a data table, right? So whatever the data inside a data table, a particular row of data is going to store. If you want to store a particular row of data from a data table, then you have to use data row. Clear? So in this example, I'm showing the inbuilt functionality. Later, I will show how to create all these things manually, right? So now you are having the data row collection. 4 rows are there, and using this for each loop, you can access each row, and each row is going to store inside this variable. Now, what is the column name? Name, email, and a mobile. So now you can access the name, email, and the mobile by using these properties, and even you can also access by using the index position. Clear?
Yes.
Right? So what is data table? Data table means it's a collection, right? Collection of rows, right? So what is data table? Data table is a collection of rows. Then how I can access each row? By using the data row property and using a for each loop. And using the row property, I can access the column, each column data by using the column name, or by using the what is this guy? Index position.
Index position.
Right? So this is how you can work with the data table. Clear this thing?
Yes, sir. Clear.
Yes.
Right. Now what I'm using here, index, right? In this case, this is my data table, right? So in this case, I can also do the same thing using the data set, right? In this case, I'm creating the data table and I'm filling the data table using the adapters, right? And again, I'm creating the data set and I'm filling the data set. And while filling the data set, I'm providing the table name as student, right? If you provide the student, right, that is also fine. If so in this case, explicitly, it is mentioning the name. And if you do not provide the table name, right, then also it is fine, right? Then in that case, right, if you are not providing the table name, then you cannot access by using the student properties. You can access by using the index position, right? So data set we will discuss in detail, but for now I'm going with the name functionality, right? So basically what I'm providing this data set. I know this data set, this is a data set, and this field method exactly going to do the same thing. Open the connection, execute the command, retrieve the data, fill or store the retrieve result in the data table only. So in this case, it is filling the data set, right? I'm providing the table name as student, right? So inside this data set, it is going to create a table with the name student, and inside that student table, it is going to store the data. Clear? If I'm not using this one, then also it is going to create a table, right? That I will show you once we discuss the data set. But for now, I'm just providing the data table name as student, right? Once it fills the student table, right, then how I can access, right? So here you are accessing the data dt.row. What is dt here? Dt is nothing but a data table. From this data table, I'm accessing each row. So here we do not have direct dt. Here we have ds. So inside this ds, right, it is having one property called the tables, right? This is a collection of tables, right? So you can see it is a table collection, right? Gets the collection of a tables content in the data set, right? So what is exactly this tables property is going to do? Now, if the data set having, right? So for example, I can create like this, right? I can create like student 1, student 2. So let's assume that we are having 2 different data tables, right? Then this tables is now going to contain 2 tables, right? One table with the name student 1, or you can say index. What is the index? 0. Another table you can say index
1.
1, right? So index 1. Now from this tables collection, which table data you want to access? You want to access student table 1, student 1? Yes, you can access student 1. You want to access student 2 data? Yes, you can access. How? You can provide this as student 2, that is going to be work, or you can provide the index position. What is the index position? 1. Clear? So
Yeah.
in this case, D is having this tables collection property, tables property. This property is going to contain, right, a list of tables, right, that are going to be stored inside the data set. Gets the collection of tables content in the data set, right? Once you got the table, right, once you got the particular data table, then how you can access each rows? By using the what property, guys? Rows property. And this is going to return me a data row. And once you got the data row, then you can access this, even though you can access by using the index position, right? Even though you can access by using the string name also, right? Let me run this application. Getting the data. Anurag, Priyanka, Priti, Sambit 2 times. Why? Because in the data table, I have written 2 console statements. Both are going to perform the same thing, right? And using data set, first set of data, and this is second set of data. Both are going to contain the same data because we are fetching from the same select query. Clear, guys? Right. Let me do something.
So
Sir,
here,
one
like,
question.
Yeah.
sorry, Bhargav, go ahead.
Okay. Sir, actually, while showing the dataset property, I think you showed one property where there is a lambda expression inside the property. Can you open that? Yeah. So what is this means?
This means it is a table collection, right? So it is a table collection, right? So you do not you do not have any idea what are these attributes, right? So once you understand this attribute, then you will understand this. So basically this table means it is saying that it's going to be a table collection, right? What is table collection? You can say it is a data table collection, right? This is means this property represent a table collection. And if you go to the definition of this property, then you will see this is a data table collection. And this data table collection means what? Now it is going to contain a collection of a data table, right?
Okay. So that lambda expression is also used to represent the similar data.
It is specified. It is just a property, right, which is going to contain a list of a collection, list of a data table collections, right? So this is not that important because we are not going to use that thing. What we are going to use, we are using the properties called the tables, right? And this table property is nothing but a table collection.
So that lambda expression represents it is equivalent to data collection is what it is.
Exactly. This table represents this thing. And what
Okay.
is this thing? This thing is a data table collection. If you go to the definition, then you will see that it is a data table collection.
Okay.
Right? So data table collection means what? It is going to contain a collections of a data table. And as it's a collection, whichever data table you want to access, you can access by using this index position. You can access by using the, if you are providing the name, you can access that using the name property, even though you can access by using the index position. Clear? Right. Now in this case, you can see this table both are having same thing, right? Now what I'm trying to do, I'm going to create another data adapter 2 object, right? And in this case, I'm just filling this adapter 2 with this method. Right now, I'm not going to paste the email, right? I'm only going to paste the name and the mobile. So in adapter 2 means student 2. Student 2 means name and a mobile. So email is not there. And if you try to access the email property, then you will get the error. Right? So different structure you can consider.
So here, like how many select queries or how many commands that we are execute, that many adapters we need to use?
No. So in this case, adapter, right? So in this case, adapter, once you fill this thing, right? So you can write adapter dot. That's fine. No, sorry. So same adapter I have created, which is pointing to this command text and on this connection. Now you can point to a different command text. Clear?
Okay, so then now the adapter which was referring to the previous collection
the
of.
previous collection is filled now. So
Okay,
once
now
this
so it
execution
will
is
replace with the
completed,
other
this
one.
adapter pointing to the database and the select statement is executed, the data set is filled. Once it is filled, then you can use the same adapter to execute a different data, a different select statement, right? And once you execute all this fill method, now it is pointing to this connection object and it is going to execute this statement inside this connection.
Yeah, I mean, like the instance of SQL adapter need to be created for different queries. Is that?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So basically, like if you like look at line number 43, so basically you are filling, right? So you are filling on index 0 student 1 table, and on line number 46 you are using similar syntax. So you are creating like another table like student 2 table on index 1, or it's just wiping out the first table, the student 1.
No. The first table is at its one place, right? See,
Okay.
in the database, right? So suppose in this database, if I'm creating this table, if I'm creating another table, is this table is going to be deleted?
No.
Then in the same
Just
situation,
appended.
so it's just going to be see what is this table collection, right? It's a collection of a database data tables, right? So you have created one table means this statement is filled means one data table is created and that data table is going to be stored inside this table's 0th location, right? Another field means in this case another data table is going to be created and another data table is going to be created in the index position first.
Okay. So basically you have cells and you are just putting one by one book on
Right,
the
so
cells.
this is the table collection, sir. It's not a single table property, right? In this case, this is a single object, right? It's a single object, right? Currently it is pointing to this instance, and when I replaced it, this is pointing to this instance, the existing is gone. But in this case, this is not the case. In this case, this data set, it's a collection of data table, right? And whenever I fill the data set once means the table what I'm created here, it is going to be stored inside the table's 0th location. Again, I'm filling the data set means another new data table is going to be created and that is going to be stored inside the table's 1th location. Clear?
Yes, and on line number 50 at the end there is a dot rows method. So basically it's like a convert
See, first of all, you just tell me this rows property is available on the data table, right? You can access this rows property on the data table, right? So if you go to data table, right, this data table having one property called row, right? So let me use this rows here, right? Go to definition, right? So this is the row, means it is going to contain a row collection. If you go to the definition, it is data row collection, and where this is available inside the data table. That means you can access this rows property on a data table instance only. And what is data table? Collection of rows. So in this case, this is my data set. And what is this? From this data set, I'm fetching one data table or not?
Yes, one data table.
And from this data table, I'm fetching all the rows.
Okay, okay. So basically, like you're like you are converting that data table into a collection of rows.
The data table itself a collection of rows, and from the data table, I'm just fetching the rows.
Okay, okay.
Data table means it's a collection of records only, right? And whenever I'm using this rows property, means it is fetching all the rows from this collection.
Okay.
Right?
Okay, got it.
Clear, guys?
Yes.
So this is how you need to fill the data set and the data tables. Any question from anyone? See, going further, I'm going to discuss data set in detail and the data table in detail, right? This is how, see, in this case, I'm just creating the data table, providing this to data adapter. Can I create the data table, data row, data column, everything manually? Can I define my data table structure? Yes, that is possible. Can I create the rows manually, add into the data table? Yes, that is also possible, right? Everything I'm going to discuss next. But for now, you understand what is the use of a SQL adapter, right? So in this sessions, this example, main agenda is not data table or data set. Main agenda is what is the use of a SQL data adapter. This SQL adapter having one method called fill, and this adapter class, right? This adapter object is working as a bridge between our data set or data table and the database, right? And it is going to execute the command on the database. It is going to retrieve the result, and it is going to fill the database. It is going to fill the data table or data set. That is what the job of this data adapter, right? So data table and the data set, again, I'm going to discuss in detail. So, but for now, any question related to this SQL data adapter, you can ask. Clear?
Yes. Can you please copy this code into that that file, Word file?
Sure, sure.
Because it's so much in detail, so like with comments.
Right? You can get the output by yourself, right? I'm not putting the output. You have to execute the code, and then you will get the output. Clear?
Yeah, clear. Thank you.
Right. So next one, once you understand the data adapter, the next thing what we are going to discuss is data table, right? So basically what I'm planning, while I'm explaining one concept, I'm relating the concept with other concept. I'm giving some basic information about the other concept. And in the next chapter, I'm discussing that other concept in detail, and I'm relating that other concept into another other concept, right? In that way only I'm going to explain. So basically first I will explain everything. I'm not explaining the code. Then I started discussing with the SQL connection class. Then I have discussed SQL command class. Then I have discussed SQL data reader. Then I have discussed data adapter, right? Now, now if you look at the starting, I mean, on the first class session, right? So we have discussed something this. See, we are having some connection, we are having the command, we are having data reader, and we are having data adapter. These are nothing but your provider classes. These are specific to your database. For example, if you are working with a SQL Server, then you have to use SQL connection, SQL command, SQL data reader, and SQL data adapter. If you are working with a Oracle database, then you have to use Oracle command connection, Oracle command, Oracle data adapter, and Oracle data reader, right? So, but you can see this data set I'm not mentioning here data table because inside the data set, data table is there, right? So data set is not provider specific, right? It doesn't matter what provider you are using, right? The data set and the table is going to be independent, right? So in this case, you can say I'm using SQL data adapter. Am I using a SQL data table? Am I using a SQL data set? No. Why? Because this data table and the data set, right? They can independently use. Independently use in the sense you can use them with the databases, right? Like this. Even though if you are not using any database, right? You can create your own data table. You can define your own data column. You can store the data, right? So that is also possible. And this is the reason why data table and the data set, they are not provider specific, and most importantly they can work on disconnected environment, right? So in this case you can see once you fill the data set or data table, then you can do whatever operation you want, right? So in this case data row, right? So data table, data row. So here you can also modify the column. That is also possible. That is what we are going to discuss now, right? So basically this data table and the data set, they work on a disconnected architecture. What it means an active and open connection is not required. Once you fill the data table or data set, that's it. Now you can do whatever operation you want to do in memory, right? For that active connection is not required, and they are not provider specific, right? As of now you have seen we are using SQL connection, SQL data adapter, SQL data reader, right? Or SQL command, but I'm not using a SQL dataset or SQL data table. Why? Because they are not provider specific. They can work on any kind of a provider. Even though if you are not using any kind of a database connectivity, without database activity, you can also do the operation on data table. That is what we are going to discuss now. So what is data table, right? The data table is similar to tables in SQL, right? And you can understand this. In this case, this table having this column, and when I'm using this data table also having the same number of a column, right? Based on the column what you specified in the select code, right? So this data table is very much similar to your database table. Clear? That means data table is also going to represent the relational data in tabular format, that is rows and columns, and this data is going to be stored in memory. So someone asking, sir, can we say data table as in memory object? Yes, it is going to be in memory object, but it is going to store the data in tabular format, that is rows and columns, but in memory, that is on your application, not in the database, but in your C# or .NET application. When we create an instance of a data table, by default, it does not have any table schema, right? So in this case, once I create this data table, this data table does not have any table schema. What it means? It means see, at this point of time, you cannot define what are the columns this data table having, what is the type of the column, whether the column taking some null value or not, whether the column is a primary key column or not, whether the column is a unique key or not. You cannot define anything, right? So this data table means it's simply a data table. Schema is not defined. And when you call this fill method, right, based on the output of the select statement, it will define the schema. Schema means it will define the column with the appropriate type and constraints, right? So, but by default, it doesn't have any schema, right? You can create a table schema by adding columns and constants, right? If you want, right, in this case, it doesn't require, but if you want, right, then you can create your own table schema, right? You can add table, you can add constant, whatever operation, right, whatever you want, you can do this, right? And this data table class belongs to which namespace? As I already mentioned, it belongs to system.data namespace, right? So you can see SQL data adapter, right? The SQL data reader connection, right? All these are provider specific. For that, what namespace I need to use? I need to use SQL provider, and SQL provider is SQL.data.SQL client. But this namespace, right, data table and data set, they are not provider specific, means they not belongs to your SQL client namespace. Now, if I comment this thing, you can see I'm getting this error. Why? Because this data table class doesn't belongs to SQL client, or it doesn't belongs to SQL provider. It is independent, right? It is not provider specific. This is the reason why you have to include this system.data namespace. But now, if I comment this thing, then you will see the provider classes which are specific to SQL Server, they are going to give me some error. Why? What are the classes? SQL connection, SQL data adapter, SQL data adapter. These are provider specific, and these are providing me or giving me some error. Clear? Guys?
Yes.
Yeah. So we can manage any type of data in our data table and data sets, like data coming from all the sources. Suppose if
See,
we are saying,
any kind of, see, without using database, I can also create a data table. I can also define the what you can say data column. I can also define a data row, right? So basically, whenever you are going to work with data table, as of now, you understand two things, right? Data table means you understand the one is a data table and another one is a data row, right? So by using the row property, you can access the data, right? The data is going to store in the data table in the form of a data row. That is what we have seen, right? So you can see I'm using data row. Why? Because data table store the data in the form of a data row, right? So similarly, if you want to add columns, how you can add column, how you can define constant, right? Everything we are going to discuss. Keep patience, right? How to create a data table? You need to create an instance of a data table class. And once you create the instance, then you need to add column by using data column class. And once you add column, then you can add data using the data row. So basically, if you remember, so how to create a data table means you have to understand three things. What are the things? First, create a data table, right? Then add columns. Add columns using data column, right? Data column is a class. Using this class, we can add columns, right? Once you define the columns, then you can add data rows into the data table. Data, clear? So first of all, we need to define data table. Then we need to add columns to the data table using the data column. Once you define the structure, I mean, how many columns are there inside the data table, then you can create the data row, right? Add data rows into the data table, right? So three things we need to understand. One is data table, data column, and data row. Three classes are basically used when you are going to do the things manually. Let's see how we can do this. First of all, you need to create the data table. You can see data table equals to new data table and student. Okay, let me show these things practically. So for this purpose, I'm not going to use SQL Server, right? So let me comment this. First of all, I need to create a data table, right? Data table, you can provide any name, right? And to this data table, if you want, you can give this data table as a specific name, right? If you go to the constructor, then you will see that this is nothing but your table, string table name, right? So this is nothing but my table name. So once you create the data table, right, then you need to add column, right? So to add column to the data table, you have to use data column class, right? And you can see while adding the column to the data table, right, you can also define the schema, right? So why we are using schema, or why you are using constant? Can anybody tell me while creating a table, why I'm using constant?
That's for the ID, so the row ID.
So basically constant means the column should store only the correct data, right? If you want to avoid the unwanted data, wrong data, right? Basically, if you want to achieve data integrity, right, then you need to define the constant. For example, you want one column, right? There you want only store the age column is there. In age column, you want the value should be in between 18 and 60. Then you can define one constant which will check while you are entering the data whether the data is a correct data or not. If you want to make one column as null, right, it should not accept any null values, then you can use that column name is using the not null constraint, right? If you want to make sure that this column is going to contain only unique data, including non-null value is accepted, but only one null value and any value is going to be null, then you need to make a unique constant for that particular column, right? And if you want to make any column as a primary key, then you can use the primary key constant on that column, which going to not only accept any null value, but it will not accept any duplicate value, right? So these are nothing but a different constant, right, that you can use, right? The same thing is also applicable in our case, right? So you can see this example. First of all, let me show you this thing, right? This picture, right? So first of all, you need to create a column, and for creating the column, which class I need to use? I need to use a data column class. So I'm creating an instance called ID, right? And here I'm providing, see, in this case, this variable name is ID. Don't think that this ID is the column name. Whatever value you are passing to this data column, that name is going to be ID, and this is the ID of this data column, right? This is the column name. ID is the column name. Then you have to specify which type of data I'm going to store inside this ID column. I want to store integer. So you have to specify id.data type equals to type of int. So it is going to store only integer type of a data. Do you want to allow unique value for this column? Yes, I want to allow unique value for this particular column. So you have to make sure this unique property is going to be true. You want to allow database null value, right? No, I don't want to allow database null value, means null is not going to be stored. So for that purpose, I have to make this property as false. Caption means caption means some information about this column. This column is going to store the student ID. So I'm providing that caption as student ID, right? So caption means if you go to any website, right? Okay. Right. This is my website. And if I move to this website, see, well, I'm putting mouse over this image. So this is open, it is showing open Microsoft SQL Server management tool. This is nothing but the caption of this image, right? Similarly, for this ID, what is the caption? Student ID. Once you create the data column, then where you need to add this? You need to add this data column into the columns property of the data table instance, right? So you have already created the data table. Within data table, there is a columns collection, right? Like the rows collection, which is going to return the collection of rows. The columns property is going to return the all the columns name, right? And then what I'm trying to do, I'm going to add this ID into this columns, right? Columns.add. Any question from this statement? From this image, anybody having any question how to create and add a data column into a data table?
No.
No.
Clear, guys? So in this case, I have used some all the properties, right? What is available for a data column, and in the next column, right, I'm going to add few properties. What is the column name? Name. What is the maximum length of this property? 50. Is it going to allow null value? No. So whenever I'm saying the maximum length equals to 50, right, by default, if I'm not specifying the data type, then it is going to be a string data type. So by default, as it is a string data type, I do not need to specify type of string or anything like this. Why? Because by default it is string. And what is the maximum length this column can hold is 50 characters. And then if you want to provide the caption, you can provide caption. If you want to provide unique value, if you want to make this column as unique, you can use unique, but I don't want this name column to be unique because some student having the same name, right? And then I'm adding this column into the data table, data table.columns.add. Clear? Guys?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Clear.
And in this case, add the data column using the default. So in this case, you can see I'm not providing any properties, right? I'm simply creating the data column and I'm adding that data column into the data table. So in this case, what will happen? So what is the default property, right? That is going to take, right? Data type is going to be character. it is going to store null value, right? All the default functionalities will be applicable to this column. And if you want to make sure this, if you want to provide any properties for this column, right, instead of saying properties, it's better to say constant, right? If you want to provide any constant for this particular column, right, you can provide constant like this. So here for integer data type, I'm showing all the properties what are available. For integer, it doesn't make sense to provide maximum length property. Integer means based on the size of the data type, it is going to store the value. For string, you can specify this. And here, if you want, you can specify the other constraint like. And here I'm creating and you know, one of the important constraint, right, is the primary key. So even though this is also possible, and you know that in SQL Server we can create a primary key which can be based on a single column, or it is also possible that the primary key can be based on multiple columns, right? You might be heard the term composite primary key. Guys, anybody having any idea what is composite primary key?
Yes.
Right, composite primary key means the primary key is based on multiple columns, right? So by combining those two columns, it is going to maintain the uniqueness, right? So similarly, in data table, right, if you want, you can make one column as the primary key, or you can use multiple columns, right? So you can see this is taking one array, data column array, right? Array means what? It can contain one column or it can contain multiple column, right? So in this case, you can see I just want to make this ID column as the primary key. See, I'm not providing the column name. I'm providing the variable name, that ID I'm providing here, right? So what it will make this ID column as the primary key column. So once it make the primary key column, right, then ID is not going to accept null value, and ID is not going to accept what? Duplicate values. ID is not going to accept ID is going to accept unique values, and I mean it's going to, whatever the primary key functionality available in a SQL Server, everything is applicable to here also. Means it is going to be unique. It is going to be it is not going to be accept any null values. Basically, these two things are there. Na? Primary key means what? It is not accepting null value, and it is not accepting duplicate values. It is only containing the unique value, right? So once you have the data table, and once you have add the data column into the data tables, right? By looking at this three syntax, so how many columns we have added into the data table? ID, name, and a email. So three columns we have added into the data table. If you want to add more number of columns, then you can add, right? But for simplicity, I have added three columns into the data table now. So once you have created the data table, and once you have added the data columns, right, into the data table, the next thing is what? You need to add data row into the data table, right? So how to create the data row and how we can add the data row into the data table, right? So basically, if you look at this table, right, so right, suppose this is one data table, right? Suppose I'm using this for each, right? So this is going to be my data row, right? So this is going to be row, and data table dot which property I need to fetch? Rows property, right? See, this rows property is going to return me the data row. That means if I want to add a data row, right? If I want to add a data row, then in which property I need to add this row? Use on this rows property, right? So basically, this rows property of this data table object is going to contain the data rows. And whenever I want to add a new row, then I have to add the data row inside this rows property. For example, suppose I'm creating one data, right? So this rows property, right? So for example, data rows dot add method is there, and inside this add method, you can add the data, right? Like this. So for that, what you need to do? First of all, you need to create one data row, and once you create the data row, then you can add that row on the data table by using this rows collection, right? That is what we are going to do next. So how to create a new row? So for creating a new row, you have to call this new row method on the data table class, right? So data table dot new row, right? So suppose I'm creating this data row. Okay, data row equals to data. See here, you can see, observe, once I'm putting that equal operator, what it is showing me? IntelliSense. The IntelliSense is visible to you guys or not?
Visible.
Yeah, so you have to use data table dot new. So in this case, what exactly happening now? Based on this data table, right? Based on the columns what you have added, right? It is going to create the data rows. Okay, let me put this thing, everything here. So first of all, I create the data table. No need to explain this thing. Data table is created. And here I have added the data column, right? So you can see this dot option is there, right? The add method is there. Add method is there means you can use collection initializer, right? So I can use these things here, right? So this add is there. So collection initializer. And once you initialize this column, right, then you can add that column into the columns properties of the data table, right? So directly it is possible, but the collection initializer is also possible. So when collection initializer is possible, now whenever the collection having which method?
Add
Add method. So this is the add method. So you can use the collection initializer, right? So here I'm directly adding. So basically I'm adding 3 columns. So column 1, column 2, and this is column 3, right? So why I'm using data table dot new row in this case? See, okay, let me first try the other syntax. Right? So why I'm getting this error? See, data row does not contain a constructor that takes 0 argument. So how many constructors are there? Let's go to the definition. This class does not have data row builder is there, does not have any constructor which can which doesn't take any parameter. So you cannot create a instance like this. And even though it allow you to create the instance, then how you can define what are the columns available, right? That I need to fill. This is the reason why this syntax is not available. And how to create the data table row means using the data table, you need to call the new row method. Once you call this new row method, right, based on the structure of this data table, structure in the sense this data table having 3 columns, right, and it will create a data row by taking those 3 rows into consideration. So what is the row? Row ID equals to this, name equals to this, email equals to this. Even though instead of this, you can also pass this integer index position. Why integer index position? It's possible because in this case, the way the sequence you are added the columns, right? In that particular sequence, the data is going to be added. So first you have added this column means this column is going to be in index position 0. This is index position 1. This is index position 2. So I can add the element by using the column name or by using the index position. But it is always preferable and suggestible to use the column name because which explicitly mentioned that this value is for this particular column, right? And if your table having 10, 20 records, and if you are using this, right, if your database table having 20 columns, and if you are using the indexing, right, then you cannot simply identify this statement, right? This statement is for which column. So always suggestible and better to use this name properties, right? Once you create the data row, then you have to add the data row into the data table. So how? Data table dot rows dot add row 1. Even though you know this data table dot rows, this data table dot rows basically accept one data row which is going to contain 3 values, right? So directly you can also pass these 3 values to these rows, right? So you can create a data row, you can add that data row into this, and even you can directly pass the values like this to the rows collection of the data table. Clear, guys?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Sir,
Right.
is it, sorry, one doubt, sir.
Yes.
Like, the column values, the default value of the column is it string, like the type of?
Yeah, the default is going to be string, but if you want, you can change. See, I'm making this data type to integer, right? So that is possible. Here by default it is going to string. Here by default it is going to string. Right? In this case, I'm not allowing database. I'm not allowing null value. Right? In this case, I'm integer. Integer means default value is going to be 0. Right? It is not going to allow null value. It is going to contain the uniqueness. I'm making this data column as the primary key. Right? So means you cannot have two employee with the same data. Right? So suppose, okay, let me run this application and then nothing to explain this thing, because in this case you are accessing the data rows using the data row. By calling this rows properties, it is returning me the row collection, and individual one by one I'm accessing each row. Right now, if I run the application, then it will give me the output as expected. But in this case, I'm not communicating with the database. Whatever operation I'm doing in memory. Right, so you can see 1 1 1 1. Why 2 statement? Because I have written, I'm accessing the data row by using the column name and index position. Right now I have making this column. Right, I'm making this ID column as the primary key. So if a primary key, then is it going to accept the duplicate value?
No.
No.
So if you try, then what will happen? Column ID is constructed to be unique. Value 101 is already present right now. So allow DB null false, right? Name. So what I'm trying to do, I'm making this as 102 and I'm making this as null. Right? Is it going to accept? Column name does not allow null. Why it is not allowing null? Because here I'm making allow DB null equals to false. Right now, I'm making this as 5. Right, maximum length as 5, and here I'm providing the value as a 7-letter word. Right, so now run the application. What is the value violates the max length limit of this column. Right, so now it is up to you how you are going to use. Right, and this thing we are doing manually, and whenever this data table is created by the SQL data adapter, right, then at that time, based on the constant data applied on the columns, right, the columns are going to be created accordingly. Clear? Right.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Right, so there are a few more things available in data table. Right, that is what we are going to discuss in our next session. Right, and a few more things are also available. You understand this allow DB null property, whether you want to allow null or not null, that is going to be specified by using DB null. Auto increment. Right, so if you know, in SQL Server there is something called identity column. What is the use of identity and what is the use of a seed and step? Can anybody tell me? Anybody having any idea related to identity column in SQL Server?
Yes, sir, I have.
Okay, so basically, if you want to make sure that one column value is going to be automatically provided by the SQL Server, as a developer, as a programmer, right, we should not provide value for that particular column, and for that particular column, you have to use identity. And while using identity, default is going to start from 1. Seed means from where the value is going to start. Step means what is the what is the, you can say, what is the difference between the next value, right? And by default, it is going to 1 and 1, right? Suppose you want to start from 1000, then you have to provide this value as 1000. And if you want the next value should be 1005, then here in step, you have to provide 5. By default, it is 1 and 1, but you can also provide your own value. Caption we have discussed, column name we have discussed, max length we have discussed, unique we have discussed. Now let me show you one example by using that auto increment property. Right, So, right. So I want this column to be primary key and I want this column to be auto incremented, right? So here you can see I'm specifying the data type. In previous example, I have used to type of int, right? So you can also use a type of int, right? This is what I have shown you previously, but this is also a type of int. You can specify like this, or you can also specify this. So this is also going to return you system.int32. What is the type int, right? So here I have used this auto increment to true. I have used auto increment seed to 100. Auto increment step to 10. That means what? Now this column value is going to be provided by the system automatically. It is going to start from 1000 and the next value is going to be, each value is going to be incremented by 10. Right now, rest of the things are going to be same. This is my name column. This is my email column, right? But here you can see, while filling this data row, I'm only providing the name column value and the email column value, right? So in this case, by default, that auto increment, that ID column is going to be automatically incremented. But while calling this directly using the add method for auto implemented property, right, you have to supply null value, and it is mandatory to supply null value for auto increment column, and automatically that value will be replaced by this constant, whatever you specified, right? Now, if you run the application, right, then you will see that the ID column is going to be started from 1000 and the next value is going to be 1010. So I have not supplied the value 1000 and 1010, but it is automatically supplied by the system. And this is possible because of these three properties. Yeah, someone asking me some question.
Yes, sir. In data type, actually, when we assigning this like type of int or get type of system, this thing. So anyhow, that the statement is giving the int only, no? So why can't we directly assign the int, the like type of int only? We need to, why need to?
So you mean to say like this?
Yeah, can't we assign like that? Like,
so what is the int? So you can't assign like this, right? So basically int is basically used to declare a data type, declare a variable, right? And I'm not declaring a variable, right? So that is the reason why I need to specify the type, what type, right? That is need to specify like this. So in this case, it is going to return me system.int32, right? Right? Suppose can I print like this? No, what it will print? But can I print like this? Yes, you can print it. See, int basically, it is main purpose is to declare some variable, right? And if you want to know what is the type of this data type, so int is not the type. Type is means what? What is the fully qualified name? What is the fully qualified name? In the sense, if you go to the definition, right? System.int32, it is the fully qualified name, right? Now, if you run the application, you will see system.int32, even though you can use get type, right? Get, what is the name of that method? Get type, right? So here also you cannot use this one. You have to use system.int32, right? Why I'm getting this error? Am I doing something wrong?
I think system dot get type we need to use full the method will be there in the system class.
So I have written this code now. Let me copy from here. Okay, system.type.getType, right? Yeah. So you have tried system.type.getType, right? So still it is giving me error. oh, you have to provide in single bracket, right? So this is not required. System namespace is not required. So type.get type, you have to provide the type using the single. So you have to specify this as a string. So that is what I have done the mistake, right? So it is also going to return the system.int, right? Clear?
Yes. Thank you.
So that's it for today. Anybody having any question?
No.
Okay. Thank you guys.
Thank you.